Hello everyone. This video is brought to you by Newton's Group of Institutions. My name is Arvind from the Department of CSE. And in this video, I'll be talking about Unified Modeling Language, UML. If you like my videos, please subscribe to my channel and press the bell icon for the latest updates. In this video, we will discuss about the history of UML. Why do we model? What is conceptual modeling? Architecture, classes, relationships, and common mechanisms in UML. In our next video, we will discuss about the class diagrams and object diagrams. Now let us see the brief history of UML. Prior to the 1970s, software designing have been aided by the use of flowcharts. So these flowcharts were the diagrams of how the various parts of the programs interacted. That is, it was primarily procedural oriented. So a flowchart displays graphically the flow of control through a program. From the mid-1970s to the late 1980s, a number of new software modeling languages appeared, and the three developers who stand out for their work during this period are Grade Booch of Rational Software Corporation, who developed the Booch methods, Ivan Jacobson of Object-Tree Incorporation, who developed object-oriented software engineering, OOSE, and James Rumbach of General Electric, who developed the object modeling technique, OMT. So here, Booch, Jacobson, and Rumbach were independently working towards the same objectives. But later in the mid-1990s, they began collaborating. So the result was the Unified Modeling Language, of which the first version, then called just the Unified Method, was being released in October 1995. So here the team of Rumbach, Booch, and Jacobson are affectionately known as three amigons. And this UML has been also influenced by other object-oriented notations. Miller and Shatter of 1998, Cord and Jordan of 1995, Writz and Brock of 1990, Martin and Odell of 1992. Here, the Unified Modeling Language, UML, is a general purpose modeling language. So the main aim of the UML is to define a standard way to visualize the way a system has been designed. So UML is not a programming language. It is rather a visual language. So here we use UML diagrams to portray the behavior and structure of the system. These UML helps the software engineers, businessmen, and system architects with the modeling, designing, and analysis. So there are so many uses of UML. The complex applications need collaboration and planning from multiple teams, and hence require a clear and concise way to communicate among them. Here, most of the businessmen do not understand the code. So, UML becomes essential to communicate with non-programmer essential requirements, functionalities, and process of the system. So, by doing this, a lot of time is saved down the line when teams are able to visualize, process, user interactions, and static structure of the system. Here, UML is linked with object-oriented analysis and design. So UML makes the use of elements and forms association between them to form diagrams. And these diagrams in the UML can be broadly classified as structural diagrams or behavior diagrams. Coming to the structural diagrams, these structural diagrams capture static aspects or structure of the system. And these structural diagrams include component diagrams, object diagrams, class diagrams, and development diagrams. Whereas the behavioral diagrams captures the dynamic aspects of the behavior of the system. And these behavior diagrams includes use case diagrams, state diagrams, activity diagrams, and interaction diagrams. Here, in this particular figure, we are seeing the hierarchy of UML 2.x, because in UML 1.x, we have only 9 diagrams. So the model, UML model started with 9 diagrams. Whereas in the current 2.x generation, we are using 13 diagrams. So here, the UML basically uses the concepts of object-oriented technology. So when I say it is object-oriented, we need to understand the concepts of classes, objects, inheritance, abstraction, encapsulation, and polymorphism. So what is a class? Here, a class defines the blueprint, that is the structure and functions of an object, where the object helps us to decompose the large system and helps to modularize our system. Here, modularity helps to divide our system into understandable components so that we can build our system piece by piece. And inheritance is a mechanism by which the child class inherits the properties of their parent class. And abstraction is a mechanism by which implementation details are hidden from the user. And encapsulation is nothing but binding data together and protecting it from the outer world is referred to as encapsulation. And polymorphism is a mechanism by which functions or entities are able to exist in different forms. And there are so many additions in UML 2.0. So here the software development methodologies like Agile have been incorporated, and the scope of the original UML specifications has been broadened. And original UML specified only 9 diagrams, whereas UML 2.x has increased the number of diagrams from 9 to 13. And the 4 diagrams that were being added are communication diagram, interaction overview diagram, sequence diagram, and timing diagram. And in UML 2.x, which also renamed the state chart diagram as a state machine diagram. Now let us see, why do we model? So before going into this particular concept, we know that the UML is a graphical language for visualizing, specifying, constructing, and documenting the articles of the software intensive systems. So the UML gives us a standard way to write the system blueprint, covering conceptual things such as business process and system functions, as well as concrete things such as classes written in a specific programming language, a database, schemas, and reusable software components. So before going into why do we model, we should first understand about what is a model. A model is an simplification of reality. A model provides us the blueprint of a system. And a model can be structural, which can emphasize the organization of the system, or it may be behavioral, which emphasize the dynamics of the system. So now let us see why do we model. So we model or we build models so that we can better understand the system what we are developing. So through modeling we achieve 4 aims. One is model helps us to visualize a system as it is or as we want it to be. And the models permit us to specify the structure or behavior of the system. And the models gives us a template that guides us in constructing a system. And the models document the decisions we have made. So we build models of complex systems because we cannot comprehend such a system in its entity. Now coming to the principles of modeling, there are 4 basic principles of modeling. So the choice of what models to create has a profound influence on how a problem is attacked and how its solution is being shaped. So every model may be expressed at different levels of precision, and the best models are connected to the reality, and no single model is sufficient. So every non-trivial system is best approached through a small set of nearly independent models. So here the UML is a visual modeling language. So here I am saying visual means picture. So here a picture is worth 1,000 words. It is an old saying. And the unified modeling language is a language which provides a vocabulary and the rules for combining the words for the purpose of communication. Coming to object-oriented modeling, in software there are several ways to approach a model. The 2 most common ways are algorithmic perspective and object-oriented perspective. Here the algorithmic perspective is a traditional view of software development, and in this approach the main building blocks of all software is the procedures and functions. So this view leads a developer to focus on issues of control and the decomposition of large algorithms into smaller ones. So as the requirements change and the system grows, system built with an algorithmic focus turn out to be very hard to maintain. Whereas in object-oriented perspective, it is an contemporary view of the software development. And in this approach, the main building blocks of all software systems is the objects and classes. As we know that a class is a description of set of common objects, and every object has identity, state, and behavior. Coming to Unified Modeling Language UML, the Unified Modeling Language is a standard language for writing the software blueprints. The UML may be used to visualize, specify, construct, and document the artifacts of software-intensive systems. And the UML is appropriate for modeling systems ranging from enterprise information system to distributed web-based applications and even to hard real-time embedded systems. So the UML is a language for visualizing, specifying, constructing, and documenting. So what is visualizing? So here the UML is more than just a bunch of graphical symbols. So rather, behind each symbol in the UML notation is a well-defined semantics. So in this manner, one developer can write a model in the UML and another developer or even another tool can interrupt the model unambiguously. Coming to specifying means building models that are precise, unambiguous, and which are complete. Here, constructing means, as we know that UML is not a visual programming language, but its models can be directly connected to variety of programming languages. Of course, it is an visual programming language, but it is not just a visual programming language. So, variety of programming languages can be directly connected to this unified modeling language. And coming to the documenting, a healthy software organization produces all sorts of artifacts in addition to the raw executable code. And these artifacts include requirements, architecture, design, source code, project plans, tests, prototypes, and releases. So here, to understand the UML, we need to form a conceptual model of the language, and this requires learning three major elements: the UML's basic building blocks, the rules that direct how those building blocks may be put together, and some common mechanisms that apply through the UML. So, to understand the UML, you need to form a conceptual model of the language, and this requires learning three major elements, that is things, relationships, and diagrams. And these things are of four types. One is structural things, behavioral things, grouping things, and annotational things. And these structural things, there are several kinds of structural things: classes, interfaces, collaborations, use cases, active classes, components, and nodes. And in behavioral things, there are two kinds of behavioral things: interactions and state machine. And in coming to grouping things, there is only one kind of grouping thing, that is the package. And coming to the annotational things, there is only one kind of annotational thing, that is the note. Whereas coming to the relationships, there are four kinds of relationships in the UML: association, dependency, generalization, and realization. And coming to the diagrams, the initial model UML 1.x has 9 diagrams: class diagrams, object diagrams, use case diagrams, sequence diagrams, collaborative diagrams, activity diagrams, and development diagrams. But whereas in UML 2.x, 4 more diagrams are being added, and there are total of 13 diagrams. And coming to the rules, the UML has semantic and syntactic rules for name, scope, visibility, integrity, and execution. And here the common mechanisms in UML is made simpler by the presence of 4 common mechanisms that consistently apply throughout the language. They are nothing but they are specification, endowments, common divisions, extensibility mechanisms. Now, let us see the basic building blocks of the UML. So here, to understand the UML, we may need to form a conceptual model of the language, and this requires learning 3 major elements, that is things, relationships, and diagrams. And these things are of 4 types in the UML: structural things, behavioral things, grouping things, and annotational things. And there are 4 kinds of relationships in UML: dependency, association, generalization, and realization. And coming to diagrams, as I said that in UML 1.x we have 9 diagrams, whereas in UML 2.x we have 13 diagrams. So 4 additional diagrams are being added to UML 2.x. Now let us see the first thing, that is structural things. So here structural things are nothing but these are the nouns of the UML model, and these are mostly static part of a model representing elements that are either conceptual or physical. And collectively these structural things are called as an classifiers. So here in this particular UML model we have 7 classifiers. They are classes, interfaces, collaboration, use case, active case, components, and node. So let us see what is a class. A class is a description of set of objects that shares the same attributes, operations, and relationships, and semantics. Here class implements 1 or more interfaces, and these classes are graphically rendered as a rectangle, usually including the class name, attributes, and functions. Whereas coming to the interface, an interface is a collection of operations that specify a service of a class or a component. So here an interface therefore describes the externally behavior of the element, and this interface might be representing the complete behavior of a class or a component, or only part of that behavior. So an interface defines the set of operation specifications, but never a set of operation implementations. Here an interface is being provided by a class to the outside world as shown by a small circle attached to the class by a line. So small circle attached to the class by a line. Coming to collaboration, a collaboration defines an interaction and is a society of roles and other elements that work together to provide some comparative behavior. So collaborations has structural as well as behavioral dimensions. And here, graphically, a collaboration is rendered as an ellipse with dashed lines, sometimes including only its name. Whereas in use case, a use case is a description of sequence of actions that a system performs and that yields observable results of value to a particular actor. So graphically, an use case is rendered as an ellipse with a solid line, and this also usually including only its name. So here the remaining three, that is the active classes, components and nodes, are all classes like. Here the meaning of all classes like means they also describe the set of entities that share the same attributes, operations, relationships and semantics. So here an active class is a class whose objects owns one or more processes or threads, and therefore it can interact, control activity. So here graphically an active class is rendered as a class with double lines on both left side and right side. So here you will be having double lines on both the left side and right side. Coming to component, a component is nothing but it is a modular part of the system design that hides its implementation behind the set of external interfaces. And here a component is rendered like a class with a special icon in the upper right corner. Whereas coming to a node is a physical element that exists at runtime and which represent a computational resource. Generally, a node will have at least some memory and processing capabilities. So, graphically, a node is represented as a cube, usually including only its name. Now, coming to the behavioral things, these are dynamic parts of the UML model. These are the verbs of the model. So, structural things are the nouns and behavioral things are the verbs of the model. So, here these are the verbs of the model representing behavior over time and space. So, there are two primary kinds of behavioral things. One is interaction and the other one is state machine. So, an interaction is a behavior that comprises of set of messages exchanged among one set of object or roles within a particular context to accomplish a specific purpose. Here, graphically a message is rendered as a direct line, almost always including the name of its operation. So here the operation what we are performing is display. So always we need to mention the name of the operation what we are performing on this particular direct line. Whereas in state machine, a state machine is a behavior that specifies the sequence of states an object or an interaction goes through during the lifetime in response to events together with response to those events. And here graphically a state machine is rendered as a round rectangle. So this is one state machine, round rectangle, state machine, state machine. So state machine 1, state machine 2, state machine 3, state machine 4. So these state machines are rendered as an round rectangles. Coming to grouping things are the organizational part of the UML model. These are the boxes into which the model can be decomposed. So there is one primary kind of grouping thing, that is namely the package. So here a package is a general purpose mechanism for organizing the design itself. Structural things, behavioral things, and even other grouping things may be placed in this particular package. And this package is graphically rendered as a tabbed folder, which usually includes its name, and sometimes it may also include the content in it. Whereas coming to an annotational things are the explanatory parts of the UML model. These are the comments we may apply to describe the or illuminate, and the remarks what we are going to make about any element in the model. So there is one primary kind of annotational thing called as note. So here graphically a note is rendered as a rectangle with a dog and corner. So this corner is called as an dog and corner, together with the texture or with a graphical comment. Now coming to the architecture, a system architecture is perhaps the most important artifact that can be used to manage these different viewpoints, and so control the iterative and incremental development of a system throughout its life cycle. Visualizing, specifying, constructing, and documenting a software intensive system demands that the system is being viewed from number of perspectives. So different stakeholders, end users, analysts, developers, system integrators, testers, technical writers, and project managers each bring different agenda to the project, and each looks at that system in different ways at different times over the project's life. So architecture is a set of significant decisions about organizing the software system, the selection of structural elements and their interfaces by which the system is composed, their behavior as specified in the collaboration among those elements, the composition of these structural and behavioral elements into progressively large subsystems, and the architectural style that guides this organization, the static and dynamic elements and their interfaces, their collaborations, and their composition. So software architecture is not only concerned with the structure and behavior, but also with usage, functionalities, performance, reliance, reuse, comprehensibility, economic and technology constraints, and trade-offs. So here the architecture can be best represented as a collection of 5 views. One is use case view, design or logical view, implementation or development view, process view, deployment view. Coming to the use case view, the use case view of a system encompasses the use case that designs the behavior of the system as seen by its end users, analysts, and testers. Here with the UML, the static aspects of the view are captured in use case diagram, whereas the dynamic aspects of the view are captured in interaction diagrams, state chart diagrams, and activity diagrams. Whereas coming to the design view of a system encompasses the classes, interfaces, and collaborations that form the vocabulary of the problem and its solution. So this view primarily supports the functional requirements of the system. That is, the meaning is the services that the system should provide to its end users. Here with the UML, the static aspects of the view are captured in class diagram. Like use case diagram, the design view of the dynamic aspects of the view are also captured in interaction diagram, state chart diagram, and activity diagram. So here we need to notice that in all these 5 cases, whether it may be an use case view or design view, interaction view or implementation view or development deployment view, in all these cases, the dynamic aspects of the view are captured in interaction diagrams, state chart diagrams, and objective diagrams. So here, coming to the interaction view of a system, which is also called as an process view. So the process view of a system which encompasses the threads and processes that form the system, concurrency, and synchronization mechanisms. So this view primarily addresses the performance, scalability, and throughput of the system. So with this, the UML, the static aspects of the view are captured using component diagrams. So in use case diagrams, we are going to use use case diagrams. In design view, we are going to use class diagrams. Whereas in process view, we are going to capture using component diagrams. Coming to the implementation view, the implementation view of a system encompasses the components and files that are used to assemble and release the physical system. So here, this view primarily addresses the configuration management of the system releases made up of somewhat independent components and files that can be assembled in various ways to produce a running system. So with this UML, the static aspects of the view are again captured by using class diagrams only. So like design view, implementation view are also, the static aspects are also captured by using class diagrams. Coming to the deployment view, the deployment view of a system encompasses the nodes that form the system hardware topology on which the system executes. So here, this view primarily addresses the distribution, delivery, and installation of the parts that make up the physical system. Coming to classes, a class is a description of set of objects that share the same attributes, operations, relationships, and semantics. And a class implements one or more interfaces. And here the UML provides a graphical representation of the class, which consists of class name, attributes, and operations. Now, let us see what is class name. So, every class must have a name that distinguishes it from other classes. So, a name is a textual string. That name alone is known as a simple name. And a path name is the class name prefixed by the name of the package in which that class lives. So coming to attributes, this attribute is a named property of the class that describes the range of values that instances of the property may hold. So a class may have any number of attributes or no attributes at all. So here an attribute represents some property of the thing you are modeling that is being shared by all objects of that particular class. And you can further specify an attribute by stating its class and possibly a default initial value to it. For example, here every wall has height, width and thickness, and we might model customer in such a way that each of them has a name, address, phone number and date of birth. Now let us see the operations of classes. So an operation is the implementation of a service that can be requested from any object of a class to affect its behavior. In other words, an operation is an abstraction of something you can do to an object that is being shared by all objects of that class. And a class may have any number of operations or no operations at all. And graphically, the operations are listed in a compartment just below the class attributes. So here, this is the compartment for attributes. So below that compartment, we are going to represent these operations. So for example, in a windowing library, such as one found in Java AWT package, all objects of the class rectangle can be moved or queued of their properties. And graphically, these operations are listed in a compartment just below the class attributes, and you can specify an operation by stating its signature, converging the name, type and default values of all the parameters and a return type. So you can specify an operation by stating its signature, which includes the name, type and default values of all the parameters and a return type. Coming to organizing attributes and operations, when drawing a class, you don't have to show every attribute and every operation at once. So to better organize long list of attributes and operations, you can also prefix each group with a descriptive category by using stereotypes, like shown here. Now, let us see the responsibilities of an class. So, a responsibility is a contract or an obligation of a class. When you create a class, you are making a statement that all objects of the class have the same kind of state and same kind of behavior. At a more abstract level, these corresponding attributes and operations are just the features by which the classical representations are carried out. So when you model classes, a good starting point is to specify the responsibilities of the things in your vocabulary. And a class may have any number of responsibility, although in practice, every well-structured class has at least one responsibility and at most just a handful of things. And graphically, responsibilities can be drawn in a separate compartment at the bottom of the class icon. So here, whenever we talk about common modeling techniques, while modeling the vocabulary of a system, you will use classes most commonly to model abstracts that are drawn from the problems you are trying to solve or from the technology you are using to implement a solution to that particular problem. So they represent the things that are important to users and to implementers. So here, to model the vocabulary of a system, we need to identify those things that users or implementers use to describe the problems or a solution. We use CRC cards and use case based analysis to help find these abstractions. And for each abstraction, we need to identify the set of responsibilities and we need to provide the attributes and operations that are needed to carry out these responsibilities for each class. Now, modeling the distribution of responsibilities in a system, we know that abstractions provide a balanced set of responsibilities. To model the distribution of responsibilities in a system, we need to identify the set of classes that work together closely to carry out some behavior. We need to identify the set of responsibility for each of these classes. And we need to split classes that have too many responsibilities into smaller abstractions. And we need to consider the way in which those classes collaborate with one another and redistribute their responsibilities accordingly so that no classes within a collaboration does too much or too little. And coming to modeling non-software things, sometimes the things you model may never have an analog in the software. So your applications might not have any software that represents them. So to model non-software things, model the things you are abstracting as a class, or if you want to distinguish these things from the UML's defined building blocks, we need to create a new building block by using stereotypes, and we need to specify the new semantics and to give a destructive visual case. And if the things we are modeling is some kind of hardware and that itself contains a software, we need to consider modeling it as a kind of mode as well as so that we can further expand on its structure. Coming to modeling primitive types, the things you model may be drawn directly from the programming language we are using to implement a solution. And these abstractions involve primitive types such as integers, characters, strings, and even enumerated data types. So to model the things, we are abstracting as a type or an enumeration. So if we need to specify the range of values associated with these types, we use some constraints. Coming to the relationships, in the UML, the way that things can connect to one another, either logically or physically, are modeled as relationships. So graphically, a relationship is represented as a path with different kinds of lines used to distinguish the kinds of relationships. So in object-oriented modeling, there are three kinds of relationships that are most important. Sorry, there are four kinds of relationships that are most important: dependencies, generalizations, associations, and realizations. So these relationships are the basic relational building blocks of the UML. So we use them to write the well-formed models. First, a dependency is a semantic relationship between the two model elements in which a change to the one element may affect the semantics of the other element. And graphically, a dependency is rendered as an dashed line, possibly directed. So we will show the direction, and occasionally including the name. Sometimes we write the name and sometimes we may not write the name. And second one, an association is a structural relationship among classes that describe the set of links. So here, a link being a connection among objects that are instances of that particular classes. An aggregation is a special kind of association representing a structural relationship between the whole and its parts. Here, graphically, an association is rendered as a solid line and possibly directed, and occasionally it includes the label name, and it often contains other endowments such as multiplicity and even the end names. And the third is a generalization, is a specialization or generalization relationship in which the specialized elements, that is the child, build on the specification of the generalized element, that is the parent. Here, the child shares the structure of the behavior of the parent. So, graphically, a generalization relationship is rendered as a solid line with a halo arrow head point to the parent. And fourth one is a realization, is a semantic relationship between the classifiers, wherein one classifier specifies a contract that another classifier guarantees to carry out. So here, graphically, a relationship is rendered as a cross between the generalization and the dependency relationship. So here, like dependency, it will be having the dashed lines, and like generalization, it will be having the halo arrow. So here the graphical relationship is rendered as a cross between the generalization and the dependency relationship. So these four elements are the basic relational things we may include in the UML model. Now coming to the common mechanisms in the UML. So here the presence of four common mechanisms that applies consistently throughout the language. One is specifications, endowments, common divisions, extensibility mechanisms. Coming to the specifications, the UML is more than just a graphical language. Rather, behind every part of its graphical notation, there is a specification that provides a textual statements of the syntax and semantics of the building block. For example, behind a class icon is a specification that provides the full set of attributes, operations, and behavior that the classes embodies. Whereas coming to the endowments, most elements in the UML have a unique and direct graphical notations that provide a visual representation of the most important aspects of the element. For example, the notation for a class is intentionally designed to be easy to draw because classes are the most common elements found in modeling object-oriented systems. So the class notations also expose the most important aspects of the class, namely its name, attributes, and operations. And a class specifications may also include other details such as whether it is abstract or the visibility of its attributes and operations. And many of these details can be rendered as a graphical or textual endowments of the classic basic rectangular box notation. Now, coming to the common divisions of common mechanisms in UML, the third one. So in modeling object-oriented systems, the world often gets divided into several ways. First, there is a division of class and object. A class is an abstraction. An object is one concrete manifestation of the abstraction. So in the UML, we can model classes as well as objects. So here, in this figure, we can see that graphically the UML distinguishes an object by using the same symbol as its class and then simplify the underlying object name. So in this figure, there is one class named customer together with three objects, J and Jan, which is marked explicitly as being an customer object. And we have the second element, that is customer. So this is an anonymous customer object. And third element is alias, which is its specification and is marked as being a kind of customer object, although which is not. And second, there is a separation of interaction and implementation. So an interaction declares a contract and an implementation represents an concrete realization of that particular contract. So responsible for faithful carrying out the interface complete semantics. So in this UML, we can model both interface and their implementations like this, what we have shown here. Here, there is one component named spellingwizard.dll that provides two interfaces, I unknown and I spelling. And it also requires an interface I directory that must be provided by an other component. So third, there is a separation of type and role. So the type declares the class of an entity such as an object, an attribute or an parameter. And a role describes the meaning of the entity within its context such as a class, component or collaboration. So any entity that forms part of the structure of another entity such as an attribute has both characteristics. So it derives some of its meanings from its inherited types and some of its meanings from its role within the context as shown in this particular figure. Coming to common mechanisms in the UML, the fourth one, extensibility mechanisms. So here, the UML provides a standard language for writing software blueprints, but is not possible for one closed language to ever be sufficient to express all possible launches of the models across all domains, across all time. So for this reason, the UML is an open-ended making which makes it possible for you to extend the language in a controlled way. So here, the UML's extensibility mechanisms include stereotypes, tagged values, and constraints. Here, a stereotype extends the vocabulary of the UML, which allows you to create a new kind of building blocks that are being derived from existing ones, but that are specific only to your particular problem. And a tagged value extends the properties of the UML stereotype, which allows you to create new information in the stereoscopic specification. Whereas a constraint extends the semantics of the UML building block, which allows you to add new rules or modify the existing ones. And in our next video, we will discuss about the class diagrams and object diagrams. Thank you all.